a simple hack to improve your agentic workflows. Before we dive into this very interesting tool and way to optimize your agentic workflows, let me give you a bit of context. So for those of you who don't know, AI agents are basically programs that can autonomously complete tasks in opposing to an LLM, in opposing to a chat interface, which basically leverages the power of the LLM. You send a question to ChatGPT or Claude and it replies with an answer. AI agents can do a sequence of tasks. Now, in order to increase the reliability of AI agents, we don't only rely on the LLM response. So for example, instead of sending a request to the agent to create a headline, for example, so we send this request to the agent and the agent sends this to the LLM, for example, GPT 4.0 or Claude Sonnet 3.7, and it returns a response. Now, in this case, when we send this prompt or request to the agent, he's going to return to us an output based on what the LLM produced. And this response is based on LLM, which is stochastic. Basically, it depends on probability and it's not consistent because every time the response can be slightly different. So for example, if I go now to ChatGPT and I ask it to generate a headline for this presentation, one time it's going to call it simple hack to improve your agentic workflows. Next time it can say 3 tips to improve your agentic workflow. So it can differ. It is basically random. Obviously, it depends on the temperature, but it is basically random. Now, in order to counter this and add more deterministic components into the agentic workflow, there is something that is called tools. Basically, tool use means that the agent can interact with external tools to get things done. For example, it can use a browser to search online, it can do an API call to get data, it can write files or update database. So not only does it provide more power to the agent, makes it more powerful and versatile, it also adds more guardrails and more predictability to the system because tools very often are just functions in which you add the input and you know exactly what output you're going to get. So for example, we can have a calculator tool in which we just provide 2 numbers and it's going to multiply the numbers and it's going to generate for us the result. So in general, if you need to remember what are tools are ways to make the agent more powerful, and it also allows you to add more predictability into the agentic workflow. Now, basically, in each framework, tool use is kind of different, but the outline is similar. So you define a tool, so you create a function that does something useful, for example, sending an email, searching a database, or adding a file. Then you describe the tool for the agent, so the agent will know exactly what does the tool do. Then you connect the tool to the agent. So for example, when you define an agent in AG2, you can tell each agent which tools from the whole library of tools that you have created it can use. And then when the conversation is starting, the agent is going to decide whether or not it's going to use one of the specific tools. So this is called a tool call or function calling, or is it going to send a query to the LLM basically. Now, before we move forward, let me just remind you about my newsletter, which is called No Fluff at nofluff.online. If you want more updates about agentic workflows and AI automation, make sure to subscribe. It's completely free. Now, the problem with many agentic workflows is reliability. And in order to counter this, as I said, instead of only relying on the LLMs to produce output, we want to add tool calling or function calling, which basically adds some predictability to the workflow. We can add a layer or layers of reflections. For example, in AG2, which is formerly known as Autogen, which is a very famous agentic framework, they invented something that is called a critique agent, which basically, whenever you send a query to an agent, you send let's say I ask a copywriting agent to generate a headline. So I send to the copyright agent, please generate a headline. We are also going to send the same request to the critique agent, asking it to generate a headline, but the critique agent has an addition to his system prompt that basically we are asking him to think of parameters to assess if a headline is good or not. Let me maybe see if I can do an example. So we have the request, which is write a headline, and we have the first copywriting agent and the critique agent, copy agent, copy critique. Now, so the copywriting agent is going to generate a headline, and the copy critique agent, we added to his prompt a request to define parameters. Define parameters to assess a headline. And then the output is going to be different parameters for assessing a headline. So for example, curiosity, witty, etc. So it's going to spit out different parameters, and then the agent critique in the flow, we have another agent which is going to take the headline that was generated. And it's going to take as input the headline plus the parameters, so curiosity, wittiness, etc. And let's say CTA, call to action, and it's going to output a score. So the score is going to be output, is going to be score for each one. So curiosity can be, let's say 7, wit can be, is it witty or not, it can be, let's say 2, and let's say CTA, the score would be 8. So this way we have a reflection workflow in which we generate a headline, then we define what are the parameters to assess the headline, then we assess the headline using another agent, and then we can have another validation agent which checks which basically checks the average. So we can define that if the average of results isn't above, if results average is lower than 7, reiterate. So basically we are going to come from here to here. So this is just a simple reflection flow. So we have the first agent who does the work, an agent that defines the parameter to assess the work, an agent that actually assesses the work based on the parameters, and then another layer, an agent that basically checks the average of results and provides feedback based on the average of results. So this is one way to add reliability to the workflow. Obviously, you can also add a human in the loop in order to QA everything. But now Anthropic team has invented and released a new addition, which I think is very powerful, and it's called the thinking tool. So basically the thinking tool, this is how it's described. So the name is think, and the description, which we are going to send to the agentic workflow, is use the tool to think about something. It will not obtain new information or change the database, but just append the thought to the log. Use it when complex reasoning or some cache memory is needed. So the think tool basically helps by creating a dedicated moment for internal reasoning, and instead of rushing to respond to act, the agent stops to analyze its current state, reflects on the tool output, and plans the next move. So while most tools, as I said, they do something externally, they generate the user function in order to do an API call or calculate something or write code or execute code. This is more like an internal tool that just adds like pausing in the workflow and assesses the current situation. Now, how is it different from thinking, which is something that was recently published by Claude, the Claude team? So the thinking tool is basically kind of like a chain of thought. So extended thinking is all about what Claude does before it starts generating a response, while extended thinking, Claude deeply considers and iterates on its plan before taking action. The think tool is for Claude, once it starts generating a response, to add a step to think about whether it has all the information it needs in order to move forward. So the think tool is more suitable for cases where Claude does not have all the information needed to formulate its response from the user query alone, and where it needs to process external information, so information in tool calls, results, etc. Now this part I took from the Anthropic blog, which you can read more about it over here, and I will show you the results in a moment. Basically, they are saying we recommend using extended thinking for simpler tools, use scenarios like non-sequential tools calls or straightforward instruction following. Extended thinking is also useful for use cases like coding, math, and physics when you don't need Claude to call tools. The think tool is better suited for when Claude needs to call complex tools, analyze tools outputs carefully in long chains of tool calls, navigate policy-heavy environments with detailed guidelines, or make sequential decisions where each step builds on previous ones and mistakes are costly. So basically, the thinking capability, which was added to Claude Standard 3.7, is more for simpler case, but this tool, which is actually called Think, is more relevant for more complex workflows and agentic workflows. Now, one thing that we didn't discuss and we're going to discuss now is, in order for us to use the Think tool, we need to introduce the capabilities of the Think tool in the system prompt. So whether we are going to add this to the specific agent or in a different type of workflow, you still need to make sure to share context about the Think tool so that the agentic workflow will know when to call the Think tool. So this is a system prompt, an example of a system prompt that was published by the Anthropic team. So using the Think tool, before taking any action or responding to the user after receiving tool results, use the Think tool as a scratchpad to list the specified rules that apply to the current request, check if all required information is collected, verify that the planned action complies with all policies, iterate over tool results for correctness. Now they're providing two examples. Here are some examples of what to iterate over inside the Think tool. So this is the XML format. Think tool example 1. Let's say the user wants to cancel flight. We need to verify user ID, reservation ID, and reason. Check cancellation rules. Is it within 24 hours of booking? If not, check ticket classes and insurance. Verify no segments flown or are in the past. Plan, collect missing information, verify rules, get information. Another example, user wants to book free tickets to New York with 2 check bags each. Need a user ID to check membership tier, which payment method exists, baggage calculation, payment rules. Now this is the plan. So these are two examples of a prompt that you need to share with your agent or whoever you want to, whichever entities that you would like to use the Think tool. Now here are some results which are pretty amazing. So this is a use case in which they checked performance of Claude when trying to solve queries related to airline, to like I showed you before, like customer support related stuff to in the airline space. So they use different types of configurations. One is the Think tool with the prompt that I showed you. One is only the Think without the prompt. The extended thinking module, which is basically just toggling on the ability in Claude to use extended thinking, and the baseline. And you can see here how significant the results were, like a significant jump in K1 when, like, what is the probability that it will work on the first try. As you can see here, this is pretty significant. And also there is a big difference between when using the Think plus the prompt and only using the Think tool. So this is why it's very important when you decide to use the think tool in your agentic workflow, make sure that you also prompt correctly, and you make sure that you define to your agents how and when to use the thinking tool. Now there is another example in a different use case related to retail, and I'm not going to go into depth about this, but you can read more about this use case in the blog post. I'm going to share it in the video description. But basically you can see over here again a huge difference in terms of results, but in this specific case the problem that they were trying to solve was less significant. This is one of the explanation that they provided why the difference isn't as significant as over here, because the problems here were more complex. But still, as you can see, the thinking tool, even without prompting, still yields better results than extended thinking, and yields better results than the baseline in all type of scenarios. Now, before we conclude, I invite you to subscribe to my newsletter, as I mentioned. Obviously, also subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're interested in AI-related stuff. And if you need help with strategy or implementing automations in your business, feel free to reach out to my email. Quick summary. This was a short video about a very interesting innovation that was published by the Anthropic team, which is basically called the thinking tool. And this adds a tool that kind of pauses in the workflow and thinks and reflects whether or not we have all the data needed, if we need to make any adjustments, and basically logs or adds to the context some sort of a debriefing stage, I would say. Based on the primary results, this seems very promising. I'm also going to start testing this, and I will publish videos in the upcoming days about how I injected this thinking tool into my workflows and into my agentic workflows. Until next time, guys, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below with your feedback. And until next time, keep on automating.